Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back to more Conversations in the Digital Age. The hordes of theater-goers flocking to see the red-hot musical Hamilton, some paying more than $1,000 per ticket, attest to the continued public fascination with Alexander Hamilton the legend, and particularly the duel with Aaron Burr on July 11, 1804, that ended Hamilton's life. With us is John Sedgwick. John Sedgwick is a memoirist, journalist, novelist, and biographer. John has written a thrilling new book entitled War of Two, Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr, and the Duel That Stunned the Nation. The drama of the Hamilton-Burr encounter is in John Sedgwick's DNA, since Hamilton penned his last letter the day before the duel to Theodore Sedgwick, our guest's ancestor, and the trusted friend of both men. In his last letter, Hamilton warned against a perversion of democracy, where demagogic leaders like Burr could manipulate popular sentiment in order to achieve despotic power. Sound familiar? John Sedgwick, we're delighted to have you with us.
Thanks. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, first, congratulations on your book. It was really a marvelous read. I couldn't put it down. And I wanted to ask you, first, I'm always fascinated with titles, and yours is War of Two. Mm-hmm. And the word duel really means war of two, doesn't it?
Right. It comes from duo bellum as a contraction. Duo bellum means war of two. And people don't quite realize that. But of course, it was perfect for this because it wasn't personal. It was political, and it was more than political. It was a conflict between an entirely different approach to life, and that they were like armies massed on two sides of a divide.
Well, Donald Trump says partisan politics is really war, and a duel seems like politics run riot. Somebody may get killed.
Yes, this is a story that ends with a bang, as we say. And yes, somebody
really
can get... All right, but only one was hurt. That's absolutely true, that politics and warfare are closely allied, and that you think of politics, politics ain't beanbag, as was also said, that it's one of those issues that's very hard to grasp because it seems to be done so civilly. Politics, that it's all a matter of words, that nobody's actually going to die. But underneath that, there is, as this story reveals, often some seething animosity that is really very primal and could go so deep as to lead to actual murder. And that's what happened here. Now, the thing that's fascinating about the duel is that I don't think that if there hadn't been such a thing as a duel in 1804, that it wasn't a sort of standard protocol for two gentlemen resolving their differences, no one would have thought to go to the cliffs of Weehawken with a pair of pistols to settle this matter. But once that was the case, once that was kind of like the minuet that you danced to, then yes, that's what they did. This was the system. This was what you did. You went out there with guns and you fired, and one man was left standing.
Well, they were both from New York. Burr, at the time of the duel, was the vice president of the United States.
That's right.
And he was the senator from New York. He had run for governor unsuccessfully. Hamilton was a New Yorker. Why'd they go to New Jersey?
Well, New Jersey then as now was, things were illegal.
It was the Wild West.
It was illegal in New Jersey as it was illegal in New York, but it was kind of, people in New Jersey sort of looked the other way. And it was why it had a sort of mob quality to it, where things were allowed even if they weren't fully legal. And so that, and even so, even in New Jersey, they went over, the two of them went over in the dead of the last little bit of darkness before the daylight, the dawn of July 11th, as you said. And so they wanted to do it under cover of darkness. And then, in fact, the system was that they would go with their seconds, and their seconds made a point of looking away at the time that the guns came out, so that if anybody were to ask them afterwards what had happened, they could say, well, I don't know, I didn't see anything, and so they would then not be impugned. But so it wasn't like it was legal, but it was something, it was acceptable.
Now, you quote at the outset of the book a poem by the American modernist poet Wallace Stevens, who wrote in his poem Restatement of Romance, "Only we two are one."
Right.
Now, did you see Hamilton and Burr as really alter egos of the same person?
Well, you know, it's funny you should say that, because that was actually my dedication to my wife, which is a whole different matter. But they were alter egos, and that they were sort of two sides of the same coin, that I saw them as one of those Dürer images that are entwined so much that you can't see one. You have to see one or the other. You can't see them both at the same time. They were deeply entangled, deeply enmeshed, and that was their essential character. It went very deep. It was as if they were two trees that grew out of the same trunk. They went in different directions, seeking different lights, but they came from the same place. And what they came from was this deep ambition and this determination to make something of themselves, to prove themselves in this new country, and to be somebody. They both wanted to be somebody. That comes through in the musical.
Well, they were about the same age. I think Hamilton was 49, Burr was 48 at the time of the duel. They had both served in the Continental Army. Hamilton came from a very strange, murky background. He'd come from the West Indies, and his parents were not married. And he came to New York, and he was educated at Columbia, and he became a lawyer. And Burr also became a lawyer. He was educated at Princeton. He came from a more substantial background. But so they were different, and they were the same. Is that really your argument in the book, that they were kind of two sides of the same coin?
Well, yeah, I think so. And I think that they were like, I don't know if you have a brother, but anybody who has a brother can sort of understand what this is. That brothers come from the same place, but brothers try to seek a separate place for themselves within the family, and that they can become quite antagonistic in trying to demonstrate their superiority to their brother. That there's a jealous
rivalry.
Sibling rivalry is what we're talking about here. And that is, I think, what was going on here. These were very similar men. They were similar in talent and ambition, but that they had to go, I think that they were forced into different directions because they wanted to distinguish themselves from the other. Each defined what the other was. Each of them was not the other. That Hamilton could assure himself he was not Burr. Burr could assure himself he was not Hamilton. And that what was threatening to Burr about Hamilton, he was a man from nowhere, that he was going to, that he would do anything to rise. Burr started out at the top, that he was a man who was, he was about as made a man in American political life as anybody could be, and Adam said as much, that he was the son of the president of Princeton, he was the grandson of Jonathan Edwards, who was the leading theologian of the age.
Calvinist.
He was utter Calvinist, and that he was as famous as a person could be in the colonies. And this was where he was from. He was set. Well, Hamilton was just the opposite. He was nobody. He didn't even know who his father was for sure. His mother had died when he was very young. He came knowing hardly anybody in New York. He was scrabbling to sort of catch on, and that all he could live by was his wits. He had no inheritance. He had no family.
But he was a man of great accomplishment. He was the founder of our financial system.
Oh, of course.
He was the founder of the Federalist Party, really a founder of American politics.
No question. I mean, but that doesn't make it any easier for Burr. And that's the thing is that one of the odd things about the two is that Hamilton laid it all out there, exactly how he felt about Burr. There is a series of damning letters and descriptions of Burr as trimmer, irresponsible, dangerous, all of these adjectives. There's nothing like that from Burr about Hamilton. Not a word. That Burr is just going to, this disregard coming towards Hamilton was infuriating to him. That he wasn't being taken seriously enough to be hated. I mean, how annoying is that? And plus, here he had a series of genuine accomplishments, just as you said. This is the man who made the American economy more than any other single person in the Washington administration. That he was the indispensable man. What was Burr? Burr didn't do anything. He went through a Senate term. He didn't without accomplishment. He was in the Assembly without accomplishment. There was nothing. There was no bill associated with Burr. There was no statements associated with Burr about what Burr wanted for the government. There was everything that Hamilton wanted, and this discrepancy between the two, that one was the absolute opposite of the other. If you believed in one, you could not believe in the other. You couldn't hold the two in your mind at once.
But at the time of the duel, they were both kind of down on their heels, weren't they? Hamilton was out of office.
Well, that's it.
The Federalists had been defeated by Jefferson, who was the president.
Exactly.
And he was just coming off a notorious sex scandal.
Right.
And Burr was also quite defeated, even though he was the vice president. It was clear Jefferson was not going to keep him on the ticket.
Right.
He'd lost his bid to be governor of New York. So you had these two political has-beens duking it out.
Well, and I think that there was a quality of mourning for both of them, and there is another element that I might add, which is that, of course, that Hamilton's son, Philip, had been killed in a duel, defending his father's honor just 3 years before, using the very same guns that would be turned on Hamilton himself. And if that isn't an emblem of a parent's distress and mourning and grief, and
well, these aren't the guns that Burr used. These were the guns Hamilton used in his duel with Burr.
Both. That when Philip went to, he didn't actually get killed at Weehawken. He got killed further down the Jersey coast. They used the famous Church John Barker Church handguns that were the ones that Philip used. And they were deployed again for Alexander at Weehawken. And so this, the memory of this must have been acute. I mean, for a father to know that his son has died for him and that his wife has been plunged into mourning. His daughter, Angelica, had basically lost her mind because of this, and that the whole family was in convulsions. And as you say, on top of that, his career was in the scupper, and that Burr, and that he had done in Burr, because Burr's gubernatorial campaign didn't just collapse of its own; it collapsed because Hamilton did him in. Now he campaigned up and down the state saying that he was a no good, and the people believed him.
Well, Burr would have been president of the United States if Hamilton hadn't campaigned against him. There were 36 ballots, weren't there?
We never know, and this is the great mystery of the time, is that okay, here we have the famous election of 1800, a tie in the Electoral College. It goes to the House to resolve. They decided on a delegate ballot, one after another. All states vote as one delegation, and sure enough, it's tied in the House for 36 ballots. Jefferson is in Washington doing his best to politic things in his direction. What is Burr doing? We don't know. Burr was up in Albany where his daughter Theodosia was getting married, and that he was absolutely incommunicado. There were no official messages that came down from Albany about his intentions. He could have been the president. He could not have been the president. He didn't say which he wanted. He didn't say which should be. He said nothing, leaving it to others to interpret. This is classic Burr, and this is also the acts of an aristocrat who says, I might live in this house. I might not live in this house. I could go live in the country. I could go live at sea. It doesn't matter to me. It's like, this is the country. This is he would be this was he was going to succeed the Federalist that it would if it was to switch to Burr as the presidency. This was a sharp turn potentially for the country. Burr didn't say a word. Now, I think that's an astonishing abrogation of duty.
Astonishing. But let's move on to the duel itself.
Yeah.
What immediately provoked the duel? It was a letter that Hamilton had sent. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. What had happened was that in February of 1804, the duel was in July. Now, in February of 1804, Hamilton was gathered with some Federalist buddies in Albany, and they're talking over the upcoming election involving Burr for governor. And somebody says, "Hey, what do you think, Alexander? Or Mr. Hamilton, however he's addressed?" And he says what he always says, which is that this would be just be a horrible move for the state. And that besides that, he's a dangerous man. He was among friends, but there was somebody there who wasn't entirely his friend, and that was an in-law who retailed that remark to the New York Daily News, the New York Evening Post, rather, which was, as it happens, Hamilton's own newspaper. It gets in the paper. Burr sees it. Burr says, "What's this? What do you mean I'm a dangerous man?" Then Mr. Cooper, who was the in-law, when he was challenged, said, "Well, there are many worse things, more reprehensible things I could have said." And more despicable things, that was the line. And that so Burr then says to Hamilton, "What's this? What do you mean by dangerous? And what are these more despicable things?" Well, he was very much rocked by this. He wasn't expecting this to get back to Hamilton, although how he could not have thought that, I don't know. That was the issue. Was he a dangerous man or not? He challenged Hamilton and said, basically, "Hamilton, what do you mean by this? Either take it back or defend, and if you can't, I'll see you on the dueling ground."
Oh.
He could not take it back.
Okay, so we saw him on the dueling ground in the morning of July 11th, 1804, and there was quite a historical controversy as to who fired first and whether Hamilton shot to kill. What happened in Weehawken?
Well, it's still a matter of dispute. There's the official line, and then there's the unofficial line. Now, the official line is a masterful piece of spin, probably the first and most significant case of political spin in our history, where the Hamilton people, once Hamilton died, got out in front with their account, and their account was that Burr had fired first to kill Hamilton, had shot him in the side. Hamilton had his arm had flown up in the air, and then in a spasm, he had pulled the trigger. His gun went off involuntarily and hit a branch overhead. And that was the line. So that in that line, Hamilton was purely the victim. That if anything, Burr was a murderer, an assassin, since this was a political instance, and that the entire city of New York and the country bought this, that Burr had killed Hamilton purposefully, and this was not a matter of honor, this was a matter of vengeance. And that everybody in New York turned out like you wouldn't believe for the service down at Trinity Church. The whole city shut all the shopkeepers shut their doors. Burr had to slink out of the city a wanted man, and he was soon indicted for murder.
But never tried.
He was
indicted in both New Jersey and New York.
And in New York, never tried. And it's an odd thing. Basically, it just fell away after many years. But then there's the competing narrative, and that is that in fact Hamilton himself had been the one to shoot first, but that he had done what he said he was going to do, which was that he was going to throw away his fire, which is to say he wasn't going to aim to kill, he was going to shoot over there. Burr didn't know that. That Burr heard the gun go off, and that by the rules of the duel, that both sides shoot, and then once they have both shot, then they can both shoot again if they choose to. So once the fire had gone off of Hamilton, Burr could take his time, and he did. And he aimed and he fired, which is why there was this very unusual element to the duel. The gunfires did not go bang, bang. They went bang, bang. That's what everybody reported. Very unusual. And why the delay? The delay because he was taking a time to line up. And the thing about the duel is that you don't realize how few duels result in deaths. First, because people don't necessarily intend to. They tend to have a showing of courage, but not to deliver a bullet to kill someone.
Gang that couldn't shoot straight.
And the other is that it's a scary situation. These guns are not meant for accuracy, that even though they're only 10 yards apart, which it seems like is right, like you and me right here, that in fact 10 yards apart is quite a distance when you're terrified, and that most of the shots missed. It did not miss in this case. He got him.
But it's been said that Burr had been training for months at a range. And is there any substance
outside of his house? That was the claim, and I think that is part of the spin. Interestingly, it was illegal to train. By the code of the duel, there was a case in Jamaica where a couple of people, where there was a duel, one shot the other, and then the other one, the guy who did the shooting, the honor shooting, was arrested, and he was convicted of practicing to shoot, which was considered not done. And he was hung. The other guy was shot. He was hung. They both died. And in this instance, too, that there was a double death here because Hamilton was killed, no question. Burr was murdered politically. Burr never rose from this again. He sank.
Later tried for treason.
Trying to
take the Louisiana Purchase away from the country.
Absolutely, and which indeed he was trying to do. I mean, he was a secessionist. It was the most serious secession campaign against the United States until the Civil War.
Okay,
he wanted to take half the country.
He was short for time, but he was acquitted of the charge of treason. But on the eve of the duel, Hamilton wrote a letter to your ancestor, Theodore Sedgwick.
Yes.
And what did the letter say?
Well, the letter said a couple of things. He said that, first, that he didn't oddly refer to Burr by name, but it was clear that he had Burr in mind. And the fact that he could write a letter under these circumstances at all is kind of remarkable. But for one thing that he said was that if the country were to be divided, it would break my heart. That dismembered was his word. And that he surely was alluding to Burr, the rumors that Burr was going to combine with some Federalists in the North, in New England, to detach New England and New York from the country and become a Federalist preserve separate from the rest of the country, which has gone to Jefferson. So he was afraid of that. But the other thing that was that he thought he was worried about democracy. Now, democracy is an interesting word for someone to use as a founder of the Republic. But democracy then meant something different from democracy now. Democracy now means that our total enfranchisement, that we elect our officials. Democracy then had much more the meaning of demagoguery, that people could be, or mobocracy, that people could be swayed by unscrupulously powerful people, that these relatively ignorant, uneducated masses would then be taken over by some unscrupulous leader like Burr, and that he was very much afraid that Burr, remember, I mean, he was the first person to campaign door to door, to do retail politics, not to campaign through intermediaries, but rather to actually take his case directly to the people, and also to remove property rights requirements so that anybody could vote. These were very dangerous developments to Burr, although they're understandable ones for us. But for Hamilton, because Hamilton felt that this would open the country up to the campaigns of the unscrupulous.
Okay, so we're seeing a lot that resonates with today's presidential campaign, aren't we? We're seeing a controversy about the use of guns. Hamilton was an immigrant. Burr had contempt for him because he was an immigrant. We have the issue of populism, and Hamilton was wary of populism and thought that the vote could be perverted by an unscrupulous demagogue. And there's a lot of food for thought, isn't there, in this whole scenario?
It's terribly resonant. I mean, it's stunningly resonant. I think that if Hamilton had any political figure that he feared more than any other, it would be a Donald Trump figure, who was able to make this kind of electric and immediate connection with a large section of the country that sort of that bypasses thought and gets right into a visceral response. It's not the way he wanted it to go. He wanted it to be a serene, rational act of governance, and that Burr was just going to violate that, and that the line from Burr to someone like Trump is pretty direct.
Hamilton is a very successful musical. People are paying more than $1,000 a seat. You've seen it. What do you make of the musical?
It's sensational.
You like it?
Hamilton has never been as popular as he is today.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Hamilton has never been as popular as he is today, but I have a question for you, John Sedgwick. Chief Justice Roberts recently said that a change in the culture left dueling by the wayside and left us with lessons learned. What lessons can we take from the Burr-Hamilton duel?
Well, one of the lessons is an unexpected one, which is that there's something to be said for duels because, for two reasons, that underlying the duel is a principle of honor. There would be no duel without honor. That this was the way you maintained honor, and honor was something that was really important to a lot of public figures, and that so that honor, which is reputation, is valor, it's a sort of public personality, was something that that people had to live by. Now, that's number one. The number two is that without a duel, perversely, it's Katie bar the door. Anybody can say anything about anyone without consequence. There's no limit to it. There's no way that you can be taken out. There's no.
Can't even sue for libel anymore.
You can't sue for libel. And so that all of these remarks and the current campaign is just littered with these outrageous comments about people. They just go all over the place. They clutter the landscape. They stir up people. And to what end? And to what purpose? What do they really mean? Nothing, except that they're these silly one-off diatribes that just devalue the currency of public speech.
Okay, Burr-Hamilton lessons learned. John Sedgwick, thank you so much for coming by.
Jim, my pleasure.
This has been absolutely marvelous. And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations in the digital age. I'm Jim Zirin. All the best and take care.